My name's Lara. I'm a member of the clergy team here at St. Luke's. And if it's your first Sunday with us, over the last 3 weeks, we've been joining through this, journeying through this epic narrative of the Exodus story of God rescuing his people from Egypt, bringing them through the waters of the Red Sea to now arrive here in the wilderness place. I've got a question for you this morning. Have you ever been so excited for something, but when you get there, you realise that it's nothing like what you were expecting? When I was about 10 or 11, my family took me on holiday to Spain. And about an hour away from where we were staying, there was this theme park called Terra Mítica. Now, my parents we didn't go to theme parks and that sort of thing. I'd never been to one before. As we were coming through the airport, I saw the brochure and I got one of the brochures. And I was absolutely desperate to go to this theme park. But it wasn't my parents' thing, standing around, scorching heat, watching me go on rides was not their idea of how they wanted to spend a day of their holiday. Why not, Then as a surprise, my brother arrived on holiday as well. He's 10 years older than me, and I thought, this is it. This is my chance. I can convince him to take me to Terra Mítica. So I put in the work, I showed him the brochure. Doesn't it look amazing? We should go. Anyway, I managed to convince him to take me. And the night before, I was absolutely buzzing. Just like a 10-year-old, just like vibrating with excitement. I couldn't sleep all night. I was so excited. Get up in the morning, I get all my stuff ready, we're in the car. As we're on our way there, I'm talking to my brother about all the rides I want to go on. I've circled them all in my brochure. Which one do you think is going to be the fastest? Which one do you think is going to be the highest? Just so excited. We turn up, we park, we get out of the car, and the music's playing. Theme park music is playing through the speakers. And I am just at the epitome of excitement. We walk up to the gates, you get sprayed with that mist. I don't know if you've ever been to a theme park abroad and you get sprayed with mist. Anyway, that was magical for me. The music's playing, I'm getting sprayed with mist. We go through these epic gates. I finally arrived at Terra Mítica. My dream has come true. So we queue up for the first ride. And it's a 20-minute queue or something, so the excitement is just building and building. The people that are on the ride ahead of me are hurtling overhead, going over the loop-to-loop. I can hear them screaming, I know it's me coming next. Finally get to the front of the queue. And I'm standing there. This is my turn. This is it. You're thinking, are we going to be at the front? Are we going to be at the back? Where's the fastest point on the roller coaster? And the guy operating the ride looks at me, quite stern-faced, and he points to the height measure on the wall. And he sends me over, so I stand up as tall as I can, stand really, really straight, and I am just a few centimetres too short. He says, I'm so sorry. You're not going to be able to go on the ride, you're too small. I was devastated. My brother said, don't worry, we'll just go to the next one. Just try and stand up a bit taller on the next one. So we go to the next ride, we queue, I'm getting excited again. I'm thinking, okay, that first one didn't quite work out, but hopefully this one will. Get to the front of the queue, points to the wall, too short. Queue up for the next ride, points to the wall, too short. We go to all of the rides I'd highlighted in my brochure that I was so excited to go on, and I was too small for all of them. I was absolutely devastated, and it was all a bit too much for 10-year-old Lara. And I cried all the way back to the villa. Don't worry, I went back a couple of years later, and I got to go on all those rides twice. But that was a hard lesson for 10-year-old Lara to learn. How do you respond when things don't meet your expectations? Or have you ever felt like God was calling you to do something, or that you really felt like he was guiding you in a particular direction with a particular decision? But when you get there, it's nothing like what you were expecting. I remember when I first started training at theological college, and I'd done all my interviews to get to that point. I thought all the hard work was behind me, and I had expectations of what those 3 years were going to look like. And they were some of the hardest years of my life so far. It was nothing like what I was expecting. And there were so many moments when I was crying out to God. I couldn't understand this thing that he'd called me to. Why was it so difficult? I knew that he was in it. What do you do when God doesn't seem to meet your expectations? In today's passage, we meet the Israelites on the other side of the Red Sea. They have made it. God has delivered them through the waters and has rescued them from Egypt. Finally, they were free. Surely life from now on was going to be nothing but sunshine and rainbows. They had been chosen by God to be his people. And what could await them but the good life, luxury, protection from all their enemies, a life of comfort? They had arrived in the promised land. But that is not what God had prepared for them. Instead, he leads them into a wilderness time, 40 years of wandering in the desert, preparing them and teaching them what it means to be his people. A season that would turn into a generation of fasting, dependence, stripping back, relying solely on God and learning how to be the people of God. And in this passage, there are 3 lessons from the desert that God uses to define his relationship with his people: water, bread, and rest. So, water. 3 days into the next part of their journey, so the Israelites have landed on the shore on the other side of the Red Sea. For 3 days they go without water. They've just witnessed God's incredible display of power over creation, literally separating the Red Sea, his power over the waters, and yet they still hadn't found any water to drink. They arrived only at a bitter pool called Marah, waters not safe to drink. And so the Israelites began to grumble and complain. This new life that God had chosen for them was already not meeting their expectations. It was already not what they had in mind. Why would God go through all of that trouble to rescue them from Egypt, just for them to die in the desert? What on earth was God up to? God knows that his people need water, but he waits first for them to come to him. Moses, on behalf of the people, comes to God and says to God, "We need you. You have brought us here. Provide for us." And God does so, instructing Moses to throw a branch into the waters, turning the bitterness sweet. This is the first miracle in the desert, and it sets the tone for the life that was offered to the Israelites. Come to the Father, follow his instructions, and receive the sweetness of life offered in him. God says through Moses, "If you listen carefully to the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you." I am the Lord who heals you. This sense of water being God's healing. God's healing of the bitter waters is the first ingredient that will shape their time in the wilderness, their journey to the promised land. If they listen to God and live the life that he calls them to, what awaits them is healing and wholeness. The second lesson in the desert is all about bread. The Israelites set off again, but this time they begin to grumble and complain, saying that they have no food. Surely God had not rescued them from Egypt for them to starve in the desert. In their hunger, they begin to reminisce about the good old days of Egypt. Sure, they were beaten, they were worked to death, they lived in chains, they had their sons taken from them, but it wasn't all that bad, was it? At least we had pots of meat and plenty of food to eat. Their physical need for food led them to stray away from their trust and obedience to God. They had already forgotten the miracle at the waters of Marah and what he had done for them in Egypt. Their allegiance, if only for a moment, returned to Egypt. Once again, Moses comes on behalf of the people. Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. Once again, God miraculously provides for them. Manna from heaven, this sweet frost that appears on the ground each morning. But this manna is not only a symbol of satiating their physical hunger, but teaching them to depend on God. Their dependence is to be on him for their daily bread, for their very lives, for everything that they need, for them to come to him as the one who sustains them, both physically and spiritually. And the final lesson from the desert is all about rest. On the 6th day, God says that he will provide 2 portions of manna, so that on the 7th day, the Israelites can rest. They can rest from their work of going and gathering this provision of God. They have enough that they need, so that all they have to do on that 7th day is just to hang out with each other, be community, spend time enjoying the presence of God and all that God has done for them and what he has made. To step into the holiness of God's time, a time of soul rest and restoration every single day of the week. An invitation to join God in the joy of all that he has made. And this final lesson echoes of Eden and the original creation narrative, stripping Israel back to its most basic elements of relationship with God. Trust and obedience that he would provide everything that they need. These 3 desert lessons re-establish God's original pattern for creation and calls the Israelites back to an Eden mindset, finding all that they need in God. God was preparing his people for what was to come. If they were going to withstand the temptations of following other kings, other rulers, and other nations, if they were going to resist conforming to the patterns of the people groups in the world around them, if they were going to be God's people, they were going to be defined by him and be acting and living in a way that was different, set apart. They were going to need to be strong, but not strong in themselves, strong in God, in knowing their identity as the people of God and knowing his identity as their Yahweh, their Jehovah, their provider God. The liminality of the desert wilderness hosted an environment for the Israelites to practice their dependence on God, learning to trust him each new day with their very lives, encountering his compassion, his forgiveness, and learning his way of life. God brought his people to the desert so they could learn to hear his voice. He brought them into the wilderness so they could learn what his voice sounds like, into this season of fasting and stripping back so that all they could know was God. To recognize his action in the world, to join him in a work of recreation and grow in their relationship with him. Now, I wish that I could tell you that the Israelites learnt their lessons in the desert and that it was all plain sailing from that point on. But this was only the beginning of God's ultimate salvation plan. Last week, Lizzie talked about the stories that we tell and how the stories that we tell over and over again shape who we are, shape how we see our world and our imagination for the future. And in this Exodus story, God is teaching us not only to look out for how to join in with his kingdom on earth, but how to join him in his mission of recreation. Where is he bringing new life? What does it mean to be the people of God? And throughout the rest of the Old Testament, people must learn these 3 desert lessons time and time again. That God brings healing through the waters. That he is the one in whom our daily dependence resides. And what it means to step into the holiness of God's time. Soul rest. Until ultimately, these markers of the new creation, these markers of what it means to be in relationship with God, reveal themselves in a new way. Reveal themselves in the person of Jesus. The coming of Jesus ushers in a new chapter of God's recreation story. Jesus' ministry begins with him coming out of the waters of baptism, being led by the Spirit into the desert, an intentional mapping of this Exodus story onto the life of Jesus. God is saying to us, see, I'm doing it again, but this time not just for one people group, but for the whole world. I don't know if you can hear the echoes. Jesus says it of himself in the New Testament. I am the water of life. I am the bread of life. I am the one in whom you find rest. A direct mapping of God's desert lessons, of God's identity onto himself. At the beginning, I asked you the question, what do you do when God doesn't seem to meet your expectations? What do you do in the face of disappointment? And I wonder if the key is to come back to these fundamental desert lessons. Like the Israelites, do we look for God in the hope of the good life, wanting for nothing, living in an earthly abundance? Or do we seek to find him as our ultimate source of healing, the one who provides for us daily, the one in whom our souls find rest? This week, we're beginning the season of Lent, a time of reflection and preparation as we lead up towards the Easter story. And each year we have this opportunity to embark on our own desert journey, to declare afresh that our healing and restoration comes from Jesus, to declare afresh that all we need, our very lives, our daily bread is found in Jesus, and to discover and make space for the rest that Jesus invites us into, that deep soul rest. And I don't know about you, but I've kind of tended to view Lent as a bit of a religious thing rather than a relational thing. In the past, some years I've given up chocolate, other years I've given up alcohol. One year I did the Daniel fast. Does anyone know what the Daniel fast is? It's like veganism, but like times a million. You can't have coffee, you can't have bread with yeast in. It's like mad. I managed to do that for 20 days of Lent, and the whole time I was just like hungry and just livid. I was just constantly raging for like 20 days straight. I couldn't hack it out for the 40 days. And I can't help but think that maybe I missed the point. And I don't feel like any of those things I ever gave up brought me closer to God. I didn't feel like I was able to hear his voice more clearly because I was doing it from a religious spirit. I was doing it from a place of religion rather than a place of relationship. And I think what this passage does is it offers to us 3 ways that we could engage with Lent. It invites us on our own desert journey, one that we can embark on our own pilgrimage over the next 40 days towards the Easter story, to know what it is to be a child of God, to find our identity in him, and to find new ways of depending on him through these desert lessons: water, bread, and rest, healing through the waters, dependence and provision through the bread, and soul rest through God's Sabbath. I think there are 3 practical ways that you might want to embark on this if you want to take up this challenge over the next 40 days. Maybe you just want to do one of these things, or maybe you're like, do you know what, I'm going for it, I'm going to do all 3. The first is water, healing through the waters. God demonstrates his offer of healing and new life through the water. Who could you commit to pray for this Lent? Maybe there's someone in your life who really needs physical or emotional healing. Would you commit to pray for that person for the next 40 days, every single day, to pray for God's healing for that person? Or maybe there's someone in your life who you would love for them to come to know Jesus and the life that he offers in him. Maybe you want to commit for the next 40 days to pray for that person every single day. The second way that I think that we can take hold of one of these desert lessons over the season of Lent is by bread, God's provision, and through fasting. Jesus reminds us that we cannot live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. That he is the one who sustains us. And when we fast, particularly when we fast food, we put ourselves in a desert place, a place where we can learn to hear the voice of God more clearly in our lives as the one who ultimately is our source of life. Where we learn these foundational lessons of what it means to be a child of God, dependent on him for our strength and for our very lives. And there are loads of different ways that you can fast. I recommend starting small if it's not something you've done before. I also recognise that for me, I have a bit of a complicated relationship with food, and so fasting has always been a challenge in my spiritual life. But it's something that I'm trying to step into more and more. So I recognise there's loads of challenges around fasting. There are lots of different ways that you can step into this. John Tyson has got a whole chapter in his book, Beautiful Resistance, all about fasting. And I really commend that to you if you want to look into that a little bit more. But it can look different for all of us. But the point of it is, where are we recognising something in our life that we have dependence upon, that we are dependent on, that we look to sustain us, that is not God? What is that thing in your life? Food is the most obvious one, but it might be there's something else that you really recognise as holding that place in your life. And finally, rest. How can we step into God's rest this Lent in a new and deeper way? It's not just a time of putting your feet up, or it's a kind of soul rest. And maybe this Lent, you want to commit to carving out some Sabbath time. I know for me, and certainly for many of us, this one is perhaps the hardest. Demands of life is so busy. Carving out time for anything, even just hanging out with friends, feels like a weekly, monthly challenge. But what would it look like to dedicate a few hours of your week, to turn off your phone, to enjoy God's creation, to spend real, intentional, quality time with friends and family, to get out and enjoy nature, to read the Bible? Where this Lent could you seek God for his healing water by praying for others? Where this Lent could you seek God for his daily bread, learning to depend on him afresh? Where this Lent could you seek out God for that soul rest, that Sabbath rest? That's my challenge for us this morning. Maybe you want to take on all three, or maybe just one. But for the next 40 days, what one of these desert lessons do you want to establish as a pattern in your life? And see what God could do.